now just confirmed that the engine chill down has started on the first stage. This involves blowing just a little bit of liquid oxygen from the propellant tank into the engine compartment to protect the engine's plumbing from the risk of damage from thermal shock from that cryogenic oxidizer.
Nice launch trajectory countdown. That pad is clear.
10, 9, 8,
launch auto sequence has started.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Go for launch.
Vehicle is supersonic.
Stage separation confirmed. Dragon separation confirmed.
Stage 1 is transonic. Landing legs have deployed. And Falcon 9 has landed.
Kinetic sequencer is also running through checks of the Falcon 9's autonomous flight termination system at this point, as well as making sure the Falcon 9's guidance system is properly configured for flight. Falcon 9 now fully loaded with kerosene fuel, liquid oxygen. Loading will continue for about another 3 minutes or so.
As a reminder, these are what we have been calling our V2 minis. The full-size V2 satellites are designed to be flown on Starship, while V2 minis have been modified to fly inside of our payload fairing on board Falcon 9. Speaking of Starship, we are looking forward to a second attempt of our first integrated flight test of the rocket and spacecraft as early as tomorrow morning. As with any development testing, the schedule could change, so keep an eye on our social and website for updates.
Away from the Falcon 9,
and if we do make an attempt tomorrow, the chances of scrubs are high, but whether a scrub or liftoff or a rapid unscheduled disassembly or some combination of all of the above, excitement is pretty much guaranteed.
And we've heard confirmation that the strong back retract has started. This begins with the opening of clamps that reach around the upper stage of the Falcon 9 rocket. Those clamps will open, allowing the strong back to begin its retraction. The Falcon 9 first stage on this mission is booster 1073 in SpaceX's fleet of reusable rockets. It's going for its 8th flight to space after joining SpaceX's fleet back in May of 2022. The booster will be targeting a landing on the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas about 400 miles or more than 600 kilometers downrange. This particular booster has flown 3 previous Starlink missions. It launched the SES-22 TV broadcasting satellite last year, as well as the commercial Hakuto-R lunar lander mission in December, the Amazonas Nexus communications satellite for Hispasat in February, and most recently,
Stage 1 LOX load is complete.
About a month ago, a space station resupply mission on a Dragon spacecraft up to the International Space Station. Here's the target orbit for this mission. 213 by 219 miles is the altitude the Falcon 9 guidance system will be attempting to place the 21 Starlink internet satellites. Now, 2.5 minutes until launch. You can see that strong back has reclined to an angle of about 1.5 degrees from the Falcon 9. Inside of 2 minutes in the countdown.
Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
Falcon 9 now is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of kerosene and liquid oxygen propellants. That stage 2 lock slow complete call we just heard is the final call to confirm that all 4 tanks
ground gas closeout.
Flight. At T-minus 60 seconds, control of the countdown will be handed over from the Falcon 9's ground computer to a flight computer on board the rocket itself. That will oversee the final 60 seconds before liftoff. T-minus 60 seconds and counting.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
Falcon 9 in startup according to SpaceX Launch Control. The onboard computer now controlling all the critical functions leading up until engine ignition and then liftoff. Engine start expected at T-minus 3 seconds.
LD, go for launch.
The launch director has confirmed he is go for launch. T-minus 30 seconds and counting. Less than 30 seconds away from SpaceX's 80th Starlink mission and the 25th launch by SpaceX this year. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition and liftoff of SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket on the Starlink 6-2 mission, adding more capacity to the global broadband network. Falcon 9 has cleared the towers at pad 40. Let's listen in to the roar of the 1.7 million pounds of thrust from 9 Merlin engines. Everything looking good so far in flight. Falcon 9 now climbing into some thin cloud cover. Big condensation plume there from the rocket as it broke the sound barrier. Spectacular shot. And as the Falcon 9 has climbed into the clouds, we're now going to switch over to SpaceX's feed. SpaceX tracking camera continues to show a partially obscured view of the Falcon 9 as it goes through this cloud cover. Falcon 9 is now past max Q, maximum aerodynamic pressure on the rocket. 90 seconds into the flight, 9 engines continue firing to propel the Falcon 9 into space with SpaceX's Starlink satellites. Engine chill down now underway on the stage 2 engine, on the MVAC engine on the upper stage, in preparation for its ignition in the next minute or so. Now about 30 seconds from main engine cutoff. That'll be followed just a moment later by stage separation. The first stage will separate from the upper stage, and that will allow the second stage to light its engine to continue into orbit. Now we're getting views from SpaceX's feed, an onboard camera view showing the plume from 9 Merlin engines beginning to expand as it ascends into the rarefied atmosphere. That plume expands in this view as that occurs. 2 minutes, 25 seconds standing by for main engine cutoff. We've heard confirmation of main engine cutoff, and there's stage separation. First stage has done its job, has separated to begin its descent back to Earth. It'll actually continue arcing, gaining altitude for about a minute or so before descending. And now ignition of the second stage engine has been confirmed. You see that engine glowing red hot in this field of view on the right. In this split screen on the left, you see an aft-facing view showing the grid fins deploying on the first stage. Next event will be payload fairing separation.
Fairing separation confirmed.
And SpaceX has confirmed payload fairing separation. Great view there of the Starlink V2 mini satellites riding the Falcon 9 into orbit this morning, 3.5 minutes since liftoff. The payload fairing halves will parachute back into the Atlantic Ocean, northeast of the Bahamas, where SpaceX will retrieve those 2 fairing shells from the sea for reuse. The first stage on the left is targeting a propulsive landing on the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas. It's continuing to fire some control thrusters. These cold gas jets that you see pulsing every few seconds are controlling the attitude or pointing of the first stage booster to slowly maneuver itself into a tail first position, where the lower end, the back end of the first stage, will take the brunt of the heating during the re-entry back into the atmosphere. First stage has reached an altitude of 116 kilometers now. It's now at basically at the point of its apex.
Acquisition of signal, Bermuda.
First stage has just accelerated, or the second stage rather, has just accelerated past 10,000 kilometers per hour. It's about 6,000 miles per hour. We're hearing calls now from SpaceX again that both vehicles are on nominal trajectories. We also heard confirmation that a downrange tracking station in Bermuda has picked up signals from the rocket. Beautiful shot of the colorful blue waters of the Bahamas down below underneath that cloud cover, in these views from the Falcon 9 rocket, first stage and second stage in space. 5 minutes since liftoff. Switch over to this map now, showing the locations of the 2 vehicles, the first stage and second stage of the Falcon 9. The first stage, as you can see, has begun its descent back toward the drone ship. The second stage on the right in this map from SpaceX, continuing to accelerate downrange with its single Merlin vacuum engine. Now approaching T+6 minutes. The next major event will be the start of the entry burn on stage 1. We should see that engine light up on the left-hand view in this split screen.
Stage 1 FTS has safed.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
And there's ignition of the entry burn. 3 engines firing to slow the first stage booster. You see the deceleration on the velocity meter on the lower left in this field of view, now 53 kilometers and descending. This retro burn is slowing the rocket down for a more controlled and safer reentry back into the atmosphere. And
stage
we're now
1
seeing
entry burn shutdown.
Stage 2 FTS has safed.
So the entry burn is now complete. The next burn on the first stage will be its landing maneuver. It'll relight 1 engine, the center engine, of its cluster of 9 engines for that final landing maneuver. The upper stage on the right is now passing 17,000 kilometers per hour and accelerating at an altitude of 160 kilometers. About a minute and a half remaining until both the first stage landing event and the orbit insertion event on the second stage. Those 2 major milestones will be occurring right after another at about 8.5 minutes since launch. On the left, we're getting a video feed from SpaceX again from stage 1, showing some of the turbulence and buffeting as the first stage plunges back into the atmosphere at supersonic speed. You see a little bit of shake in that camera view as the booster stabilizes with the help of those aerodynamic grid fins. We heard the call that stage 1 is now transonic, so it's now below the speed of sound.
Start of terminal guidance.
Stage 1 landing burn.
Landing burn now underway to guide the first stage booster toward the drone ship, now appearing in view from this onboard camera. grid fins at work controlling the rocket as it descends toward landing.
Landing leg deploy. Stage 1 landing confirmed.
Stage 1 has landed. It's arrived on the deck of the drone ship, a short fall of gravitas, completing a more than 400-mile downrange journey in less than 9 minutes. This was the 8th flight for this booster 1073 in SpaceX's fleet, and we just heard also confirmation of
nominal orbit insertion,
shutdown of the upper stage engine, as well as a confirmation that the upper stage of the Falcon 9 has reached the targeted orbit, the targeted transfer orbit for this mission, beginning a coast phase that'll last about 45 minutes. Beautiful view here of the 15-story tall first stage booster sitting on the deck of the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas in the Atlantic Ocean northeast of the Bahamas. And here's the view from the upper stage showing the stack of Starlink satellites in orbit.
Expected loss of signal, Bermuda.
The upper stage will be coasting for about 45 minutes before a reignition of the Merlin vacuum engine for just a couple of seconds. That's expected about 54 minutes into the flight, and that will place the 21 Starlink satellites rather into their targeted 213-mile, about 219-mile orbit at an inclination of 43 degrees to the equator. That will set up for the deployment of the 21 Starlink satellites at T plus 1 hour and 5 minutes. So still about 55 minutes to go in today's launch sequence before SpaceX can call success on this Falcon 9 mission. SpaceX is wrapping up their live video webcast right now, so we're not expecting to get any more live views from the rocket during the remaining milestones of its flight. We will have a mission audio coverage from SpaceX throughout the remainder of the mission for the next hour or so, and that will provide us some confirmation of the restart of the upper stage engine, that critical burn still to come, and then a confirmation of the separation of the 21 Starlink satellites about 1 hour, 5 minutes into the flight. As you can see in this map from SpaceX, the first stage is now stationary on the first stage, or the drone ship of SpaceX in the Atlantic Ocean. The Stage 2 vehicle now coasting over the Caribbean Sea, passing over the Lesser Antilles. It's heading out towards South America in the next few minutes. Now has reached orbital velocity, but it's not in the final orbit that it needs to reach for deployment of the Starlink satellites. That's going to be done with the next burn coming up at 54 minutes into the flight. With SpaceX's Starlink 6-2 mission now off the ground, SpaceX's next launch on the current schedule will be the test flight of the Starship and SuperHeavy vehicle. This 400-foot tall rocket is standing on its launch pad in South Texas today, ready for another try to launch potentially as soon as tomorrow morning from SpaceX's Starbase facility. A launch attempt on Monday was scrubbed due to a valve problem in the first stage pressurization system. As you can see, SpaceX technicians and engineers are huddled around the vehicle on booms as well as on scaffolding to reach the bottom of the first stage, presumably for some checks and troubleshooting before SpaceX proceeds into this next launch attempt, which is scheduled no earlier than tomorrow. But that assumes that all this work is completed in time. And earlier this morning, very early this morning, SpaceX's Elon Musk tweeted that they're working on many issues that they need to resolve before attempting a launch attempt again. So maybe it'll launch tomorrow, maybe it'll be another day, but we hope to get some more news from SpaceX on their status later today as they head into this overnight countdown. They'll need to clear the pad in the very early pre-dawn hours tomorrow morning to allow time to fully tank the Starship and SuperHeavy with methane and liquid oxygen, leading up to a target launch time of 8:28 a.m. Central Time at 9:28 a.m. Eastern Time. or 1328 UTC tomorrow. There's about a 1-hour launch window available for this test flight for SpaceX tomorrow. SpaceX also has a backup launch opportunity available on Friday if they need to use it. The goal of this mission is an learning exercise, essentially, to gather data on the performance of the first stage and the second stage of the Super Heavy Starship vehicle before future flights push the limits of the vehicle's performance, as well as potentially carry operational satellites, such as bigger versions of SpaceX's Starlink Internet spacecraft. The Starship is also planned for use in NASA's Artemis moon program as a human-rated moon lander to land astronauts on the moon for the first time since 1972, in conjunction with NASA's own heavy lift rocket, the Space Launch System, and the Orion crew capsule. All of these vehicles, the SLS, Orion, and Starship, will be working together to return humans to the moon in NASA's Artemis lunar program. We'll be covering this launch when it happens on spaceflightnow.com, so stay tuned to our website as well as our social media channels for updates on the Starship. Meanwhile, at Pad 39A, SpaceX is preparing for the next launch of a Falcon Heavy rocket that's scheduled for a week from today, no earlier than April the 26th. Falcon Heavy, of course, is the vehicle SpaceX has designed to consist of 3 Falcon 9 first stage boosters bolted together to triple the total power at liftoff of the rocket. The Falcon Heavy was scheduled to launch yesterday, but SpaceX a few days ago announced a delay for it to perform some more checks on the vehicle. We have sources that indicate that SpaceX is swapping out a couple of engines on the Falcon Heavy before proceeding with the launch attempt with the Viasat-3 Americas satellite. This spacecraft, owned by California-based company called Viasat, will be providing high-speed broadband service across the Americas from this new satellite in geostationary orbit. It's one of the most powerful satellites, commercial satellites ever built, and will ride the Falcon Heavy directly into a circular geosynchronous orbit on a 6-hour mission, a very demanding launch profile that will require the Falcon 9 to actually expend all of its first stage boosters, so no recovery of the core stage or the side boosters will be possible on this upcoming flight due to just the sheer energy and velocity required to lift this heavy satellite to such a high orbit, 22,000 miles over the equator. Now 17 minutes, 20 seconds since liftoff. Here's a look at some of the mission stats for the Starlink 6-2 mission. This was the 218th flight of a Falcon 9 rocket since 2010, the 228th launch overall by a Falcon rocket, including Falcon 1s, Falcon 9s, and Falcon Heavies since 2006. This was the 8th launch and landing of this particular first stage booster, number 1073 in SpaceX's inventory. This was the 185th SpaceX launch from Florida, the 121st SpaceX launch from Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. This is the most used launch pad that SpaceX has at their disposal. This was the 176th launch overall from this pad, Launch Complex 40 at the Cape. This includes 55 launches of the Air Force's Titan rocket family, beginning in 1965 through 2005. before it was handed over to SpaceX for modifications for the Falcon 9. This was the 158th flight of a reused Falcon booster. This was the 186th landing of a Falcon booster, including Falcon 9s and Falcon Heavy side boosters. And notably, it was the 112th consecutive successful Falcon booster landing dating back to 2021. This was the 80th SpaceX launch, primarily dedicated to the Starlink Internet Network, the 25th SpaceX launch of the year, and the 19th orbital launch attempt from Cape Canaveral so far in 2023. And assuming the upcoming milestones to place the satellites into their final orbit and to release the satellites from the rocket go according to the plan over the next 40 to 50 minutes or so, SpaceX will have achieved their 195th consecutive successful mission. This dates back to 2016, when a Falcon 9 rocket actually exploded during a pre-launch test at Cape Canaveral that resulted in the destruction of an Israeli communications satellite. The last in-flight failure of a Falcon 9 was back in 2015. However, we're going to count that 2016 accident as a mission failure because it destroyed the rocket and the spacecraft, although the destruction occurred on the launch pad. And before we sign off, we'll look ahead at some upcoming launches we plan to cover over the next week or so. The next one on our calendar is the Super Heavy Starship test flight that we've talked about several times in our coverage this morning. This will be an attempted around-the-world test flight of the Super Heavy and Starship. The Super Heavy booster will attempt to place the Starship along with propulsion from the Starship itself, attempt to reach a near-orbital velocity, a long suborbital arc, reaching an altitude of about 150 miles or 250 kilometers. The Starship will, if everything goes according to plan, will re-enter the atmosphere over the Pacific Ocean about 90 minutes after launch, and then perform a hard ocean impact north of Hawaii. But there's a lot that has to go right before reaching that point, including igniting all 33 engines on the first stage and having a good first stage burn for 2.5, nearly 3 minutes. And then a good burn of 6 Raptor engines on the upper stage, much of this untried and untested. This is the very first integrated test flight of the nearly 400-foot tall stack of the Super Heavy booster and Starship rocket. And Elon Musk and SpaceX have tried to set expectations low for this test flight, emphasizing that the main goal is not to reach orbit, is not to place a payload into space, it is to gather data, to refine their models, and to potentially iterate their design for future versions of the Super Heavy and Starship for future test flights going forward that may have a higher chance of mission success. So that's the launch schedule for tomorrow. You're looking live there just a moment ago at Starbase, courtesy of Lab Padre. This weekend, India's Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle will launch a Earth observation satellite for Singapore from the Satish Dhawan Space Center in India. And then next week, SpaceX will have a couple of more missions on their calendar. A Falcon 9 rocket is set to launch another batch of Starlink Internet satellites April the 25th from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. And the next day, April the 26th, a week from tonight, SpaceX plans to launch their next Falcon Heavy with the Viasat-3 America's Internet satellite from Launch Complex 39A at Kennedy Space Center. We've talked about that mission a little bit in our coverage. That launch is scheduled for around 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, about 11:30 p.m. UTC, just before sunset local time here in Florida on April the 26th, the week from tonight. We'll leave you with one last look of the tracking map showing the upper stage with its 21 Starlink satellites still attached over the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Brazil, heading to the southeast. It'll soon pass just south of South Africa, and then make a swing over the Indian Ocean before relighting its engine at 54 minutes into the flight for a very short 2 to 3 second burn, and then separation of the 21 Starlink satellites is planned at 1 hour and 5 minutes. SpaceX is not providing any live views of the rocket during these upcoming maneuvers, so we're going to sign off our live streaming coverage and commentary at this point. We'll have updates on the outcome of the mission on our social media channels, as well as on www.spaceflightnow.com later this morning. Here's another view of the empty pad at pad 40. The strong back raised back to vertical after today's launch. Falcon 9, the first stage now on the drone ship in the Atlantic Ocean, the upper stage, and the Starlink satellites now in orbit. The next launch from pad 40 is currently targeted for April the 28th, 9 days from today, with a pair of satellites for the O3B broadband network. So I'm going to sign off our coverage. My name is Stephen Clark. Thank you for your support and for viewing the launch with Spaceflight Now today. If you want to support our coverage, you can join our YouTube channel and become a member. Depending on which membership level you select, you can gain access to bonus members-only video features, and you'll help us continue to bring you live coverage like we brought you for this Starlink launch today. You can also support in the Super Chat here on our YouTube channel, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. You can do that for free and get alerts every time we're going live with any launch coverage at the Cape or anywhere else around the world. So my name is Stephen Clark. Thanks for joining us. I want to thank Stephen Young for production and video support today, and we'll see you next time. Have a great day.